as you know. Thank
Perfect.
you. Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Is it okay, Marilyn?
Yes, Osiris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to mention that my camera, I tune it on and then suddenly it turned off by itself. So it's not that I'm trying to leave the meeting. It's just tuning off by itself, and I tune it on again and it goes off again. So I hope that you can hear me.
Yes.
Because the microphone also sent me certain message that I haven't received before. So
Osiris, we can see you and hear you.
okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, Jason, it's all yours.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thanks so much for the introduction. And thanks, Marcia, for starting us off with our land acknowledgement. It's a pleasure being here. Again, like Marilyn said, for the third time. And it's a little cold outside, but so it's a nice day to be inside, actually, right? So I'm going to share my screen. Let me just...
I just have to go to the bathroom.
Go.
Okay.
You're allowed. You're allowed.
We have that recorded as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen and get the presentation started. And I might cut in and out of the presentation throughout because we've got a lot of material to cover, and I have a lot of things that I want to share and talk to you about.
Jason, just to make sure, what would you prefer us to do with the chat? If somebody, has a question, do you want us to interrupt or wait for the break?
Maybe we could wait for the break. Is that okay? Marcia, is that okay? I do have 1 10-minute break, kind of 45, 50 minutes in. Is that all right? If there's any chat questions, then I could take them, and then we can certainly reserve some time at the end. Does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Awesome. Okay, so thanks again for being here, everyone, on this cloudy Wednesday morning. My presentation's titled Becoming My Parents and the Journey Back to Myself. These are tools for healing and building self-esteem. So again, thank you, Marilyn, for inviting me here. Jesus, of course, who can't be here. I think Nun as well, who's probably in the background. So thank you once again. It means a lot to me to be able to share my story. So this topic is so important. And if we can make little changes over time, that accumulates to big changes in a lifetime, right? So thank you. So as Marilyn kindly introduced me, I'm an author and speaker, author of the book Living with the Dragon, Healing 15,000 Days of Abuse and Shame, published in 2017. I just want to quickly pause for a second, Marilyn. Are you seeing also the video of all of us, our faces? Well,
I just see 4 because I'm choosing.
Okay, I'm going to minimize. I'm going to hide that. How's that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I don't want to block the presentation. Thank you. So as Marilyn said, I'm also a speaker, and I've had the opportunity to not only speak with the Kawasa Neighborhood House, but several other mental health organizations throughout my journey, throughout my lifetime as an author. Spoken in Ottawa, I've spoken at SFU, POCO, RCMP, to name a few. Always a pleasure for me. A little bit about myself, other than being an author. I'm a 51-year-old male, Canadian-born Chinese. I have an older sister and older brother, and born in Vancouver, BC, and I grew up in North Burnaby. As Marilyn said, I'm a dad to a wonderful, incredible 22-year-old son. I'm currently in a relationship. I graduated with a food science background, and I work full-time in the food manufacturing industry. I live in Coquitlam. We're neighbors, Marilyn, and still haven't run into you, but one day we will. I enjoy traveling, exercising, dining out, spending time with friends, and watching movies. So that's a kind of a small snapshot of who I am. I love this quote. It's a quote that was taken from the movie, 2014 movie title, This Is Where I Leave You, starring Jason Bateman. It's about a family, dysfunctional family, and their father passing away, and it's kind of a drama comedy. In one of the quotes, it says, "It would be a terrible mistake to go through life thinking that people are the sum total of what you see." I love that, because here I've just given you kind of a snapshot of who I am, or parts of the windows of who I am. And you've met me already at the start of this presentation, and you might have a little bit of your own judgment, which is perfectly normal, of who I might be and what I might be like, for those of you who've never met me. But there's so many aspects to us. There's so many facets to who we are. So we have, we have a lot of dynamics in us as people, and we only see a small window of our lives, unless we want to share it with each other. So what I didn't share with you about me is that I'm divorced for over 20 years now. My son, my incredible son, we're estranged for over 3 years now. I'm also estranged from my sister. My older brother, he has schizophrenia and has had schizophrenia since his early 20s. I was maybe about 14 or 15 years old when he was diagnosed. My dad passed away in 2010, and my relationship with my mom currently is distant, is how I would describe it. I grew up in a home with family violence. I was physically, emotionally abused by my parents. I was bullied at school a lot. Probably grade 8s through 10 were the worst years for me of being bullied. I have a son, my son, who struggles with depression, anxiety, and in his early years, he was cutting himself, so he was self-harming. I have struggled in my relationships. As I mentioned, other than the divorce, I've had other relationships that I've struggled with. At times, I suffer from symptoms of depression, anxiety, borderline personality disorder. And I guess one of the positives on this list is that I do attend counseling sessions regularly still. It's something which I actually enjoy doing. So there's so many aspects about ourselves. We have, what we kind of perceive as good and normal, but then there's so many layers underneath us all. And I've shared with you just a snapshot again of some of the things that, we may or may not see in people who struggle both mentally or physically. Sometimes we don't see that, but then you might ask and wonder, well, how did this all begin? How did your life transpire to become all this? And I think to get to that, I have to share with you a little bit of my family history. So my family originally came from a small country called Brunei. I'm always curious, how many people, just show of hands, anyone heard of Brunei? No?
No.
No? Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Because, growing up, I would always say to my friends, oh yeah, my family came from this country, Brunei. And everyone would be just like you. It's like, where's that from? Where's that from? Nowadays, as I got older, I feel less embarrassed, less ashamed. It's like, no, I'm owning this, is that my parents came from Brunei. It's this tiny country on the island of Borneo, kind of close to Malaysia and Singapore. And I feel proud of that because, in our world, especially in our diverse culture here in Vancouver, in Canada, we see so much diversity, so many cultures coming in, bringing great food, great music, a great eclectic type of people living together in one place. And, it makes us feel proud as a human race to have so many cultures just blended together. And, to share that my family came from Brunei is something that I own and take pride in now. So anyway, so they immigrated in 1967, my mom and dad and my brother. My brother is 7 years older than me, and my sister is 4 years older than me. So in this picture here, family picture of us at Christmas time, there's my dad and my mom carrying me. I'm the youngest, and then my sister sitting in front of me, and then my brother just looking up towards us. So as I mentioned, we've had, I grew up in a home filled with family violence. You wouldn't know by looking at this picture, but my mom and dad were very strict parents. They were providers, very strong providers of family. And by that, I mean that they provided us with food, shelter, clothing. There was never a shortage of that. They made it work. Despite the fact they had to work hard, they saved, they came over to Canada with something like $500 and they made it work. Here in this picture, we're living in East Vancouver, and that was probably I was around 3-4 years old, so about 1977. And it was a tiny home. There was only 2 bedrooms, the main room, which is where my mom and dad slept, and then there was the other room where the 3 of us slept in. And I didn't know better. I was born in that neighborhood and raised in that neighborhood for the first 7 years of my life, and I loved that home. I was actually quite used to it. I had friends, play dates with other kids and all that. So it was kind of a nice little starting home for us. But my parents needed to have a bigger space for us, so they eventually moved us to North Burnaby, and it was a really, really big home, and it was really fantastic because it was brand new. But the neighborhood was really different. So I went to Burnaby North Secondary School and Westridge Elementary School in North Burnaby. I don't know if any of you are familiar with those schools, but at the time in the late 70s and 80s, it was a very different culture there. Whereas East Vancouver, when I grew up in, it was predominantly Asian culture. And then when we moved to North Burnaby, it was predominantly, well, it was kind of a split. There was a lot of Caucasian Italians, and there were some Asians as well. But I really felt like a fish out of water. And during that time, growing up in North Burnaby, it was difficult. The transition going to a new school, having no friends, because I went into grade 1 where there was all the kids had already established friends. I went in partway through in April, and my parents worked a lot, and they looked after the home a lot, so they didn't have a whole lot of time. And of course, there was the abuse, which I'll share more in detail with you on the next slide. And then I think, other than the difficulties transitioning to a new neighborhood and school, getting bullied as I got older, and then the terrible thing happened when my brother fell into his mental illness. My brother has schizophrenia, and he still lives with schizophrenia. He lives on Commercial Drive and in a home, and he struggles with his illness. And this is partly because he didn't get the resources that he needed growing up. We grew up in a very stereotypical Asian family where we didn't talk a lot. We didn't share feelings whatsoever. Because if we did, we would be told that's nonsense, stop talking nonsense. My brother's mental illness really started kicking in when I was about 14, 15, and he was about 22. And I don't know if you're familiar with schizophrenia, but it's a very debilitating mental illness where the individual, sometimes untreated, loses their sense of comprehension, loses their sense of coherence. So they would erratically talk out random things. They would shout at things randomly that make zero sense to the rest of us. And it can be terrifying. And it was very terrifying for me growing up with a brother with mental illness, where we didn't know what was going on. And then with all the family violence going on and the chaos going on, we're always shouting at each other growing up. My dad beat me a lot. My mom beat me a lot. There was zero space for understanding or compassion or love for my brother. Even for myself, I didn't offer any of that. We all shut him down. We shunned him. We shamed him as he developed this illness. And he would shout at the television set randomly. I would be home alone with him, and he would be talking to the TV set, and I would be so terrified and not knowing what to do. I'd talk about it with my parents, but they would just shut me down and say there's nothing wrong. So in addition to that, there was a lot of family violence going on. A lot of shoving matches, a lot of shouting, name calling, not just from my brother, but from my sister as well. And especially when my brother's mental illness got quite uncontrollable, there were random fights with my brother that he and my sister would have, or he and I would have. Until one night that he was shoving my sister and shouting downstairs, and I was terrified and frightened. I decided to take things into my own hands. I was upstairs at the time, and I quickly dialed 911. I think I was about 18 or 19 at the time. So I was scared. I called 911, reported the family violence, asked the police to come to our home. My dad immediately ran upstairs and ripped the phone from my hand and said, "Why did you do that?" He scolded me. "Why did you do that?" And my mother was, my typical mom would say, "Now the neighbors are going to know. And now everyone's going to know." So my brother eventually got treatment, but my family, just again, not terribly emotionally connected, refused to acknowledge that my brother had a mental illness. She would tell everyone else that Joseph doesn't have a mental illness. Tell them that he's fine. He's cured now. He's fine. He's fine. So we were all in denial of his mental illness. And it pains me because I could tell this story now, because it must have been such a terrible and painful time for my brother. And I can only feel compassion for him now that I didn't have that space to do so before. And it was awful with the things that we said to him and how we treated him. So that in general was what it was like growing up in my family home. It's important for me to talk specifically about my dad and mom. And this is really to paint a picture and put in context of who they were. And our caregivers are the ones that shape the children and how they development years, like how they develop over their developmental years. Our parents are the ones who set the foundation of how a child sees himself or herself growing up. And if our caregivers aren't able to do that, it becomes challenging for the child as they grow up into their teenage years, into their adulthood, into their own relationships. Much like what Marilyn had shared with you, we pass it along. We pass along our generational wounds. My dad, unfortunately, passed away in 2010. He was in his late 70s. And I didn't know him very well. I didn't know my dad very well. And I'm saddened by saying that. And I regret that I didn't know him very well. Growing up, my dad didn't spend a whole lot of time with me. We hardly ever spoke, even growing up, into my school years, into my adulthood. Even when I became a dad, we hardly ever spoke. My dad, in general, didn't treat me very well. Again, he was a provider of the family, food, shelter, and clothing. But he didn't treat me very well. He punished me a lot. And by punishment, I wasn't talking about just grounding me and sending me to my room, but he beat me a lot. My dad hurt me physically, hurt me emotionally. So whenever I was disobedient or behaved like any typical child would behave, my dad would beat me. And he would beat me with his hand, his belt, shoe, a piece of wood one time. I still remember that one time with that piece of wood. That was really, really painful. And I was probably no more than 7, 8 years old, and he would beat me, and I was crying, and he would just yell at me and shout at me, telling me to stop crying and continue to wail on me while I'd be on the floor. So my dad really struggled with his own personal demons, his own personal challenges. He wasn't an alcoholic. He didn't do drugs. He was a man who had a history that I didn't know about not until perhaps the last 2-3 years. See, my dad, when he was growing up, he didn't have a dad either. He was around 6 years old when he lost his dad. So he didn't have a role model. His mom raised him and his siblings. But from what I understand, his mom didn't treat him very lovingly. This story pains me that I'm about to share with you is that I think my dad was probably no older than, the picture of me there on the left. And one night he didn't bring home enough firewood. This was back in Brunei. He didn't bring home enough firewood for dinner. His mother, irate with him, took his dinner plate and dumped it into the trash right in front of him. And my dad was hungry that night. He was just a little boy, again, no older than that picture of me there. How can a mother do that to her own child? How is that love? How is that support and encouragement? So my dad had to cope his way through life, through his childhood, through his adulthood, and into parenting me and my siblings. He didn't know any better. There was no men's group back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There weren't any resources for them to look online to understand about themselves or YouTube videos for them to watch. And our family being, this typical, stereotypical Asian family, we didn't talk about mental health and mental illness. In fact, it was stigmatized. Whoever talked about mental health was crazy. The conversation stops immediately if ever it did come up. So yeah, my dad hurt me a lot emotionally and physically. And he left me with a lot of scars and a lot of trauma to manage. And none of that was okay. However, there was a lot of history with my dad that I'd never understood until now. My mom, in comparison, she was, just like my dad, a very hardworking mother. She was a provider. She worked 2 jobs, and she cooked and cleaned a lot. She did a lot of laundry. She ironed, and she hardly ever sat down to spend any time again with myself or my siblings. Once again, my mom didn't spend a whole lot of time with me, didn't really play with me or my dad. Like, we never threw the softball, together or played in the park together. We didn't do any of that. My mom's role was really just to feed us, raise us, clothe us, and keep us sheltered. And she did a great job of that. But as we know, many of you are probably parents, I assume, many, as you know, that there's so much more than the basics of clothing, housing, and food. I mean, those are privileges for a lot of people, but there's also an emotional aspect that is required to develop a child into a healthier mindset. So if our parents don't provide any emotional support, emotional encouragement, there's always going to be something lacking, which I'm going to get into in the next couple of slides. And my mom hurt me a lot physically too. She beat me a lot with a bamboo stick, her hand. She would beat me when I was disobedient or if I played too much. My mom and dad did not encourage play at all. Always, why are you playing so much? Well, like, you should be reading, you should be studying, you should be doing your homework. I started to understand my mom's narrative. See, my mom in Brunei, she was the eldest sibling of, I think, 12 or 13 kids. So by the age of 13 or 14, she had to look after everyone. She had to cook, clean, do the laundry for all the other kids, and even for her mother, my grandmother. So there was no room for my mom to play when she was a young girl. And that saddens me too. Like, she missed out on her childhood. And she passed that along to her kids too. Play is a luxury, right? So this kind of segues into the whole piece about childhood trauma. And, I'll preface this by saying that I'm not a psychologist. This is things that I've learned through my years of talking to counselors and doing a lot of reading. I read a ton of books, and my understanding of trauma is something that I've learned over the years, and continue to learn just through reading. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you understand that this is coming from a place of just self-learning. So how I describe trauma is significant events in our lives that leave an emotional wound and shape our core belief system. Okay. Again, Marilyn touched on this at the very start when she said about trauma and how we see ourselves and our beliefs. So let me kind of rephrase this a little bit. So these are kind of like trauma, something that happens in your life, whether they're small events or big events that have this profound emotional impact on you in how we see ourselves. Okay. So let me give you some specific examples. So like little traumas, these are actual examples from my life. So little traumas, for example, might be like playing and laughing, being silly, was discouraged. So I'll tell you a story about me being a little boy, and I used to love playing Legos, like the little building blocks, the Lego toys. I had this childhood friend who would come over once in a while to play with his Lego. He had the Lego spaceships. I had the Lego castle set. It was really fun. So he would come over and play once in a while. And this one night, we were playing in the family room, and I should have known better as a 10-year-old boy. I should have, like, that we were playing a little bit too loud. We were getting really excited, and we're having fun, being silly, laughing. And it was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, 4 o'clock is the time when my dad comes home from work. When he comes home from work, he wants the house to be dead quiet. He gets rattled and irritated so easily. So if I was watching TV, for instance, I'd have to turn the volume down. I should probably be in my bedroom at that time, just being quiet, remaining small, so that my dad doesn't hear or see me. Because if he did, we'd get very upset, and I would either get yelled at, scolded, or beaten. So that one day that my friends Darren were over and his brother were playing Lego, we're in the family room. My dad comes home from work, and I didn't even pay attention or wasn't aware that my dad was already agitated. So he was in the kitchen, the room next to where we were playing, and having his tea and just decompressing from work. My friends and I continued to play. By about dinner time, my friends got picked up by their parents, and my dad ripped right into me. "Why did you play so loud? Did you not know I just came home from work and I'm so tired and stressed out?" My dad beat me that evening for just playing Legos with my friends. So you might say that was kind of a big traumatic moment. But the whole idea is that playing and laughter, and being silly at home, just being a little child, was discouraged, both by my parents. And again, it was something that they just didn't have in their lifestyle growing up. They associated play with laziness, which is so incorrect, and it's a fallacy. Another little trauma, or little T, is that love was conditional and earned. So we never spoke about our emotions to each other growing up. It wasn't in our DNA. It was not in our culture, not in our family culture anyway. So we didn't say, I love you, mom. I love you, dad. Give me a hug. Give me a kiss. None of this that we do perhaps with our kids nowadays, or some of us do. I'd come home with good grades, and the best I got was good job, do it again next time, or do better next time. I came home one year in grade 8 and I had like 7 A's and 1 B, and the best I got was good job, do better next time. And so this whole concept of love, whether it's emotional connections or physical connection, it felt like there was always on this carrot on a stick dangling in front of me, like always out of reach. So I'd always have to prove my worth, prove that I'm good enough to be loved, prove that I'm better than the other kids. And that was another thing where parents would compare us to other children. Oh, so-and-so has gone to medical school. So-and-so is playing the piano. So-and-so has aced their Chinese exam, or they got 8 A's instead of 7 A's. So those narratives, those stories that we tell our children, that if we're comparing to some other kid, what does that say to the child? It says to them, we're not good enough. See what the neighbors are doing? You're not doing good enough compared to them. You're not doing well enough. Birthdays are a little T for me, even to this day. So I don't recall I recall only having one birthday party growing up. And I know a birthday party is a privilege, and not every child has that opportunity. I just remember this one year, I think I was in preschool, my mom baked a lovely chocolate cake and brought it to the school, and we shared it. And I still have a fond memory of that photograph of me and my mom. But the rest of the years, my birthday in March was just this fleeting moment. We would have cake, but it was never really on my birthday. It was and it wasn't, or we'd share it with another birthday with someone else, and it was not even really a celebration at all. There were times on my birthday where my dad would beat me because I was crying or I was upset. So even to this day, growing up as an adult, when it comes around March, I feel a little bit triggered. I feel triggered, in multiple ways. My girlfriend and her kids, they want to celebrate my birthday. Then I feel humbled. I feel really humbled and small. Like I don't deserve this recognition. I don't deserve this birthday. And I get a little bit uncomfortable and anxious. Like, why are you celebrating for me? Like, this is not something that my family did for me. It feels uncomfortable. But on the other hand, if they don't talk about my birthdays, because it's been a year or two where it hasn't been brought up and I get a little anxious, it's like I'd get into an argument with my girlfriend. Why aren't we planning for my birthday? Why aren't we gonna go out? Why aren't we celebrating? Why aren't you asking me what I want for my gift? Because then there's this underlying resentment that I probably have still with my childhood. I didn't have the things that I hoped I always wanted. Some of the big traumas I've already talked to you about. It's the childhood abuse growing up. The bullying was really tough, as I mentioned, grade 8, 9, and 10. The memories of that still kind of scar me, where I would get shoved at school, I would get shamed, I looked different, and I walked differently than the others, and I didn't have a whole lot of friends, so I was singled out a lot. I was laughed at and made fun of. So the trauma of bullying, I don't know if any of you have any find this relatable at all. It has a lasting effect. If you couple that together with childhood abuse, it really doesn't make one feel that great about themselves. Discrimination is another thing, right? Back in the day, I was called the C word, being Chinese, and many times. And that was okay. That was okay by school teachers, and that was okay. When I reported it, it was okay for them. And it's ugly to think that that was okay at a time. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with attachment wounds, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a later slide. As I mentioned, moving homes was a big traumatic moment for me. When we moved homes and I had to change schools, I didn't have any friends in grade 1, and I didn't want to go to school. I got singled out at school by my teacher, and it was just really embarrassing, really traumatic for me, and not a fond memory of moving homes. My older brother was schizophrenia. It goes without saying. The traumatic stories that I have and experienced, that's something that I'm going to have to continue to process throughout my life. Divorce is a big traumatic moment for many. My ex-wife left me, and being a single parent and a single dad at the time, like I looked after my son ever since he was like a little boy, like a toddler, like 1 year of age. Even after we split up, I was there as a dad, and I made a promise to make sure that I was there as a dad. But it was a traumatic time for me because I was living with depression and a lot of anxiety, had no one to talk to about the challenges of divorce and being a single parent. Some of you might relate. And it left an emotional wound in how I see myself to this day. And my son, with his self-harm and his depression and anxiety, and even the fact that, that we've been estranged for 3 years, that's a traumatic moment for me. This is a traumatic time for me. And it does wear on my core belief system. So how does all of this shape my core belief? So our core beliefs are how we see ourselves. And by that, I don't mean how we see ourselves in the mirror. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm a good looking fella, or my eyebrows look a little funny. Not like that. How we see ourselves is how we see ourselves underneath, subconsciously. Okay. Do we believe we're a good person? Do we believe we're lovable? Do we believe that we're a super smart person? Do we believe that we're this amazing, incredible individual? Right? Well, if my core beliefs are right here in the middle, and what I shared with you, the abuse, the bullying, the attachment wounds, conditional love, getting good grades, discrimination, discouraged play, discouraged social interactions, and an emotionally unstable home, how do you think a child sees himself or herself? With all this happening, well, it's no wonder that my core beliefs are the following. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I don't matter. I'm a bad person. Others aren't to be trusted. It's not safe. My needs are not important. So you could see that underneath everything that I showcased to you today, I might come across as someone who's confident, who's got his life all together and everything. But underneath it all, everyone, I'm just human like you all are as well. And that we all have our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities as well, because of our story that we experience. I mean, look at it this way, if our caregivers don't provide us with the emotional security and safety, if there was bullying, if there was abuse at home or violence at home, how is a child in their developmental years of ages 2 to 10 or so, how is a child supposed to see themselves as being good enough, as lovable, that they're good people, that they do matter? How are they supposed to see that if this happens? It's counterintuitive, right? It doesn't make sense. They can't. But if we have a family network that provides us with a loving home, words of encouragement, affirmations, support, understanding and empathy and patience, then a child can develop and see themselves as being worthy, good enough. Because when talk about attachment wounds, our child looks up at our parents. When a child cries, they look to their parents, to their caregivers, to be soothed, to say everything's okay. Because that's where the trust is. There's where that bond is between a child and their caregiver. But if that bond is severed with abuse, neglect, emotional instability, a child has to cope in their own way. So there's a lot to process here about our core beliefs and where they come from. One of the things, and maybe this is time to bring out your pen and paper if you want. I'm going to share with you a lot of tools. I think there's about 8 or 9 tools I'm going to share with you today, and this is tool number 1. Okay, this is what I've learned in therapy and doing a lot of reading, is challenging my thoughts with cognitive reframing. So this is taken from a form of therapy called cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT for short, for those who are familiar with it. So the whole premise of cognitive behavior therapy is that an event happens which triggers our thoughts, and our thoughts fuel our feelings, and our feelings are the drivers for our behavior and actions. Okay, so let me give you a real life example. Okay, my girlfriend doesn't text me because I already see myself as someone who's unworthy and unlovable. Remember, okay, my girlfriend doesn't text me. And so what does that do for my thoughts? It provokes thoughts of, oh, she doesn't love me anymore. She doesn't care about what's going on in my day-to-day life, or she's too busy for me because I'm not important enough. So those thoughts are going to drive feelings of despair for me, aren't they? It's going to provoke and promote feelings of anxiety. It's going to promote feelings of resentment, maybe anger, hurt. How do you think my actions are going to be because I feel that way? Most likely my actions aren't going to be very warm and fuzzy, are they? I'm likely going to be responding to her maybe in anger or frustration. Or maybe I'm going to respond to her by not responding to her. I'm just going to build a wall and be emotionally numb. Right? So what if we change that thought? So that's the whole premise of CBT, cognitive reframing. So the event happens, she doesn't text me. There could be so many things with our thoughts that could be happening that we could be thinking about. So if we thought that maybe my girlfriend is stuck in traffic, maybe my girlfriend is on a work conference or on a work webinar and can't respond to text at the time, or there could be so many reasons why. So many reasons that does not suggest that I'm not worthy. And what's that going to promote? That's going to promote feelings of either neutrality or feelings of maybe empathy even, or maybe feelings of concern or love. That's going to promote a much healthier behavior. I want to share with you a short video. It's about a 4-minute video of Dr. Gabor Mate. I think many of you probably have heard of him before. So in this video, he's being interviewed by a podcaster, and he talks about reframing our thoughts, similar to what I just shared with you, but he does it in a much more elegant way, I think. So let's just watch together. Just going to close this off. Bigger. There we go.
Or when I teach, I ask people to tell me some recent episode when they're upset with somebody with their lives. Something that they're open to sharing. So it doesn't have to be anything sordid or thing, but just something, whether it's your spouse, partner, the bus driver, a friend. Okay, so what happened?
There were a number of issues in my home, broken aspects of the home, things that were falling apart or needed to be fixed. Physically.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And I had hired someone to do these things while I was gone.
Okay.
And I came back and none of them were fixed.
Okay. And your emotional reaction was?
Anger.
Rage. Anger, okay. Anything else besides anger?
frustration. I was disappointed.
Disappointed is sadness. Well, disappointed is not so much an emotion as a state of mind. I'm asking what the emotions were. What's inside disappointment? Something didn't happen. I wanted it to happen. How do I feel? Isn't there sadness there?
Yeah, sadness.
So there's anger and sadness. Those are the emotions. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you a silly question. What were you sad and angry about? What does that mean that they didn't fulfill their commitments?
They didn't care about me. They didn't have that. They didn't respect me.
So they didn't care about you and didn't respect you. What kind of person doesn't get cared or respected?
Someone who doesn't deserve to be cared for or respected.
Exactly. Somebody unworthy, right? If there are other people here, which there usually are when I do this exercise, I would ask them, okay, we just listened to Tim tell us about this experience. Are there other reasons why this other person might not have done the work that has nothing to do with him or her not caring about him or not respecting him? So what other reasons might there be?
I spend a lot of time going and working with neuroscientists to hack my brain. Just like I go to a gym to work out,
A million and one.
Name one.
Yeah, he could be in the hospital.
He could be in the hospital.
His
What else?
partner carried one. Could have been in a car accident.
Exactly.
He had a flight delay and got caught on Puerto Rico during a hurricane.
He's got ADHD.
Yeah.
He can't follow through. He's under stress and he couldn't. Okay, and any number of possibilities.
Yeah.
Now, of all the possibilities that you've just outlined, including that they don't care about you or respect you, which is the worst one? So let's notice something. I should say we, because we're all like this, we don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens, okay? That's what the Buddha said. It's with our minds we create the world. So that if you'd found out he had ADHD or he was stressed or, you might have been sad for him, but you would not have been angry and you would not have been sad. So, first of all, we don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens, to our interpretation of what happens. Number one. Number two, of all the possible interpretations, we choose the worst one. Thirdly, what I just said isn't true. We didn't choose it. It's not like you went through all these possibilities and you said...
It wasn't multiple choice I chose.
You didn't, your brain jumped there automatically, right? Well, the question is why?
Yeah.
Now, here's the learning. First time in your life that you felt hurt and angry that when you perceived somebody didn't care about you or didn't respect you? Or has it happened before? And most people I talk to, it goes back way back into childhood. And that's what trauma is. We don't respond to the present moment. We respond to the past. But along the lines of our discussion, it's a beautiful learning opportunity. Now you get to know. Now, what if you assumed for a moment that you're the most lovable, most worthy of care, most worthy of respect person in the history of the universe, and this guy doesn't do your home? What's your response?
Any number of the other options, which does not trigger an intense negative emotional state.
Yeah. So something in you, I would argue, still believes that you're not worthy of care and respect, and that's what gets triggered. So who's the one that doesn't care about you, and who's the one that doesn't think you're worthy of respect?
No, it'd be me.
It'd be you. So that's a learning.
No, it is.
And this is exactly what you're talking about.
So that's a great video by Dr. Gabor Mate, and it kind of echoes what I've been sharing with you about how our traumas growing up and environment can shape how we see ourselves and how we believe in ourselves. So again, just to recap the tool of challenging our thoughts, when an event occurs, we naturally have, if we experience trauma, we naturally occur thoughts geared more towards the negativity bias rather than thinking, healthier and more productive thoughts. So the key in CBT, which takes a lot of work and practice over the years, is to identify those thoughts and then challenge those thoughts. Are those thoughts useful? Are these thoughts true? What is the underlying meaning of these thoughts? And if these thoughts are, well, my girlfriend's not responding to me because she's not texting because she doesn't love me. Well, is that really true? Was it really seeing about myself? It's saying that I'm not lovable. And that's where we got to challenge it and reshape it. So this kind of segues into my next slide, being a dad. And I would like to continue on. This will be my last couple of slides, and we're going to take a 10-minute break. Are we okay with that, Marilyn?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
I was
okay,
just
okay.
texting actually about it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
okay, perfect. So as you all know, I am a dad, 22-year-old son. And I can't believe he's 22. Time flies. And time especially flies when you haven't seen him for 3 years. It's almost 3 years to the day I haven't seen my son or spoken to him. And it pains me to this day. And this is this next couple of slides are kind of ones that I've just put into this presentation, relatively new, because it's not something that I was really planning to talk about, but I think it's really important that I do and share with you the struggles that I have as well. He's an amazing young man. He's super smart. He loves computers, computer games. He built his own computer when he was like 14, 15 years old. Loves basketball. He taught me how to love basketball. And watching the playoffs right now, it's just fun. And, you know, he's a great cook. He cooks a mean steak, and just amazing young man with a lot of aspirations. But he has struggled too with his mental health. He has struggled with his depression and anxiety. He has struggled with, as I mentioned, depression and his self-harm when he was in his younger years. And he's suffered from managing his emotions. And I have to say that I can't speak on behalf of his mother, but for me, I'm sure that I've passed on some of my trauma onto him unknowingly. And, you know, we had our falling out. He and I were really tight. We were really great friends together. We spent a lot of time, played basketball together. We hung out, watched movies, went out to eat. We did a lot of stuff together. And we had a falling out over basketball, of all things. But I think there's so many more layers underneath that he's still working to process, or having difficulty processing and understanding, or even articulating as to why he's so angry at me still. But as a dad, you know, I have to take ownership of what I've done and how I have impacted him as well, both positively and negatively. So how I became my parents was that when he was growing up, I was very impatient with him. I was controlling at times and short-fused and angry. Now, I was never physically abusive the way my dad was, but I yelled at him from time to time. I put him down and I shamed him. Not proud of myself. I was anxious with him as well. I was feeling his anxiety, and he struggles a lot with his anxiety and social interactions. And there were a lot of times, and I was belittling to him. I remember this time, he was around 6 years old or 5 years old. We were at the beach at Spanish Banks, and he lost his sandals. I ripped right into him on the car ride home. And I feel awful about that, telling you the story. I yelled at him. I shamed him. I raised my voice so loud. It must have terrified the poor little guy. He cried and pleaded to call his mom. And all I could do was just sit with my anger over a lost pair of sandals. How terrible was that? But as a dad, as I mentioned before, we have so many other aspects of us as parents. There's more to us than this one side. And yes, I was these things to him. But I also saw in a lot of ways, I was very encouraging and supportive. I was loving. I expressed my love verbally to him and was affectionate. I was never shy with that. I promised myself I wouldn't raise him like my dad. And even though I did have aspects of my dad show up, there were so many aspects that I wanted to bring out to be the best version of myself for him. We were like best friends. We talked life together. I was approachable to him. I would talk about my personal struggles and he would share some of his sometimes. I was always trying to help him share his internal challenges with me, to verbalize it. And he still struggled with it, but I hope
Hello?
that...
Hello?
Hi, Marilyn?
Sí. Sí, pero estoy en una presentación.
Oh, sorry. I had to mute Marilyn.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. And we had a lot of fun together. We played together a lot, watched a lot of movies and cartoons growing up. It was fun. It was fun having a little best friend. So we did spend a lot of great times together. And this part of my journey is still ongoing, and the healing process is still ongoing. But one of the tools, and this is tool number 2, is the power of forgiveness for self and for others. And I know this is sometimes a sensitive topic. What is forgiveness? Why should we forgive the ones who have hurt us? But I see forgiveness as letting go, not for them, but for us. In the scenario for my son and I have to forgive myself for making the poor choices and mistakes that I have when I did raise him, and even on the day that we did have our falling out. And just remember that forgiveness does not condone the actions of, the people who were mean to us or the people who abused us. It doesn't say it was okay. It does not make what happened forgotten or reconciles anything. It doesn't repair the relationship necessarily. And the significance of forgiveness is to release one from resentment and feeling anger. And that resentment and anger sometimes is internalized so much that we live in this stressful environment. Sometimes we're stressed out. We don't even know why, because we're hanging on to resentment and anger. Cortisol levels are higher. We're not sleeping well. Right? So if we forgive, we can let go of all those things. We can let our body breathe freely without feeling resentment and anger. And then with forgiveness, it gives space for grieving. To grieve for the loss, in my scenario, the loss of my son, my relationship with my son. To grieve for the loss of my childhood with my parents. Right? Because grieving is a necessary part of healing. And I'm sensitive to the time, Marilyn, I know, and I'm going to go through mindfulness real quickly. So tool number 3, this is a real important tool. The act of being and paying attention. So being aware of what you're experiencing at the moment. So this is a very helpful tool in my healing journey, in restoring my self-esteem. And the purpose of mindfulness is to separate ourselves from the past and future. And we're anchored to the present moment. So right now, for example, hopefully you're paying attention and listening to me. So that's the act of being mindful. Right? And I'm simplifying it. So how do we become more mindful? We exercise no judgment. Right? We're not judging anything. We're just observers. So we're observers of ourselves and our surrounding, the others. Okay. We have a beginner's mind when we're mindful. So, for example, there's mindful exercises on eating. So you could, for example, you're eating an apple. It's like you're eating an apple for the very first time. And that's what it means by beginner's mind. It's like you're washing your hands, feeling the water for the very first time. And then most important about mindfulness is that we let go of any expectations to an outcome. Mindfulness is not a tool to say, oh, I'm going to be happier. I'm going to feel happier just because I'm going to be practicing mindfulness. No, we let go of expectations. It is about clearing the mind and just being in the moment. So I was going to do an exercise with you. I won't do that because we're already an hour in. I got a lot of material left to cover. So I do have a slot for a 10-minute break, if that's all right with everyone. To stretch your legs, use the washroom, grab a coffee, and then get some juicy stuff, the fun stuff, my relationships. Okay.
Perfect. Perfect. Remember to stop the
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks. Hope you had a chance to stretch your legs and get a drink or whatever you need. I'll continue on my presentation.
Okay.
My relationships. Oh, wait. I'm not sharing my screen yet.
Yeah, you have to share screen.
I'll figure this out one day.
You're doing great. Come on.
Okay, here we go. From current slide. There we go. Okay, so my relationships. Get to the fun stuff, keep you awake. So, I'm an insecure person. Okay, I'm just gonna say this right now. In my relationships, I am insecure. I'm the insecure one always. The one who's wondering if my partner's gonna leave me, the one who's wondering whether or not I'm good enough for this relationship, the one who's always questioning the relationship. I'm the one. I'm the shit disturber in the relationships. I say this jokingly right now, but of course, when it's showtime, when the real relationship happens, it's not so much of a joke because we get into a lot of arguments. I'm gonna try to move this. There we go. So my relationships and the ugly parts. It's difficult sometimes for guys to be talking about this, and I feel like I'm in a very safe space with everyone here. And I've done this many, many times, not just with the Kiwasa Neighborhood House, but I think it's really important that men talk about their feelings and they talk about their inadequacies as well. Otherwise, we live in this bubble where we think we're self-righteous. We think that we are can't do no wrong. But the truth is, as Marilyn and I were talking on during the break, we're all human. We all have a part. We all have a story. So for myself, I could say that I'm very insecure at times. And this is not an absolute. That's why I say at times. I'm very insecure at times and constant need for validation in my relationship. So I do doubt the relationships that I'm in. I'm currently in one. She's a wonderful woman. We've been together for 4 years and going strong. She is the rock in my relationship. And I'll just maybe start off by saying that. But I have the ugly parts that creep up, like the jealousy sometimes and lacking trust in my partner. I get emotionally dysregulated quite often. And then I get into angry outbursts and questioning my partner's intentions. I'm often on defense because I want to protect myself from getting hurt. I dissociate and freeze, and sometimes I feel empty inside. Okay? I'll give you an example. I'll just pause there and give you an example. So my partner, my girlfriend and I were in Kelowna last weekend. And we went to we were just driving around to this winery. And our intention was to have lunch just after this winery, right? We were just going to drop in and then go have lunch somewhere else. So we show up at this winery, and I think it's called Creekside Winery. And we went in to do a wine tasting. And then I said to her, it's like, yeah, I don't really like rosé. I don't like rosé, so let's just go. Well, my girlfriend says, no, like, why don't we just stay just another 15 minutes? We just stay and then we'll just see how it goes. But I said, yeah, okay, well, plus I was feeling a little bit cold. The weather was a little chilly at the time. So I said, well, okay. I just kind of caved in. I said, okay. But the truth is, I didn't really want to go. So, we paid good money for this, or she paid good money for this. It was like $25 a person, which is a lot of money to do a wine tasting. So we go in there and we get 3 tiny glasses of wine, like 2-ounce samples, and a tiny little appetizer, like a tart. And it was taking place outside. So I was not happy. I got emotionally dysregulated and I dissociated, and I just didn't want to talk to my girlfriend at the time. We were there for about 10 minutes. I was getting cold, and my girlfriend kept going on about how she loves it here, how the wine's really good, and I was just numb. Didn't want to speak to her. And she knew there was something wrong. She goes, is there something wrong? I said, yeah, I want to get out of here. What a ripoff this place was, I said to her. I was angry. I was upset. $50 for this? So we drove off. I left first and got in the car. She gets in the car and we drove off, and we had an ugly argument. We had an ugly argument because I was not able to articulate what my needs were. Okay. So all of this, the angry outbursts, the dissociation, the freezing, that happens to me. And that can happen really quickly. I get triggered, and we'll talk about triggers later on. So we got into what our couples counseling calls demon dialogues. We got into this ugly shouting match, name calling, you know, and it wrecked the rest of that day for sure, and maybe the rest of the trip. But you know, we eventually made up and patched things up and made the most out of the rest of the weekend. But my point is that because I was unable to articulate my boundaries and share with her what I really wanted, she couldn't hear what I wanted. She didn't know this is what she wanted. She wanted to go to this wine tasting. Right? So just an example of what can happen to me. Cognitive distortions like black and white thinking. So there is no gray area. So maybe like in the scenario of the wine tasting, maybe I could have expressed to her in a much healthier way. Hey, listen, I'm not really into this. I'm feeling a little bit cold anyway. Plus it's time for lunch. Like that was our plan to go for lunch. We didn't want to spend too much time here. Like, could we just say 10 more minutes and let's go? So for me, it was kind of black and white. No, it's either I like it or I don't. And if I don't like it, I'm going to be ugly about it. I self-sabotage in relationships as well. So for example, like the questioning and doubting the relationship. I grew up in a home where it was chaotic, emotionally chaotic. In my girlfriend's home, it's very loving. It's very safe. It's very warm. But self-sabotaging, because I'm so used to growing up in an environment where there was a lot of shouting and chaos, that's where my body feels safe, doesn't it? That's like its natural state is in chaos. So I kind of bring that into the relationship sometimes by starting an argument or provoking something, even though it doesn't need to be. Doubting the relationship so that I could feel comfortable again because there's chaos again. So all this time growing up in my household, I thought that was normal. That was my normal. I thought that's what all families did. And as I got older, then I realized, wait, happy and healthy relationships do exist. What I grew up in was not a happy and healthy relationship or family environment. So I have also a fear of abandonment and fear of rejection. Fear of rejection is a big one for me. So even sometimes asking friends out for coffee, instead of asking them out for coffee and them saying no because I don't like the feeling of being rejected, I just simply don't ask them out. It's not really a healthy strategy, but it's a coping mechanism sometimes. Because my fear of rejection, again, going back several slides before about my core beliefs, well, I'm not good enough. I don't matter, or I'm not lovable enough. My friends won't want to hang out with me. So I spend a lot of time ruminating about thoughts. And that's where the mindfulness tool comes in. If I ruminate about my relationship, whether or not this is going anywhere for the next 5, 10 years or a lifetime, or is this going to end in a year? Well, if I apply mindfulness techniques, I don't need to ruminate about those things. People pleasing and losing myself. So inauthentic behavior. So the classic example of me going to that winery and not asserting my boundary in a loving way of saying, no, I really don't want to go here because I'm not a big fan of rosé and it's cold. I could say that in a healthier way. That's heard. Instead, I caved because my girlfriend said she wanted to go. So I was people pleasing and I lost my sense of self. And by people pleasing, I was pleasing no one at the end because we ended up in an argument because I wasn't able to articulate my emotions. So one of the things I've learned over the years is about my triggers. And just to define what triggers are, a trigger is how I define it as a sharp emotional reaction to something said, done, or perceived. That reaction can lead to an immediate response or behavior. Triggers are a message, often of an unhealed wound. Okay, so for example, my girlfriend and I play golf. And I don't know how many of you play golf, but we play golf and I'm on the putting green, I'm putting. And we take turns putting. Normally, what we say to each other is that we'll watch each other putt and finish putting until the ball goes into the hole. So it was my turn to putt one time, and I putt, and my girlfriend already had walked away, you know, put her golf clubs in the golf bag, and she didn't watch my ball go into the hole. And in an instant, I got angry and upset with her. Why didn't you watch me? Blah, 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 blah. I started an argument. We fought for the rest of the way of the golf game. And that was a trigger for me because she walked away. She did not mean any intention to hurt me. There was no ill intention whatsoever, but the trigger, the emotional reaction for me was that I felt unseen. I felt I wasn't important enough. I felt that I was unworthy or not good enough for her to watch. So I got upset. So learning about my triggers, I also have to identify where do I feel the triggers in my body. There's a famous Dutch psychologist, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. He talks about how trauma is stored in the body. Dr. Ariel Schwartz as well, somatic therapist, will also talk about this, about how the body stores trauma. Okay. And those traumas will surface in the triggering moments. So for me, the triggers are like, I feel it in my chest and I feel it flood in my head, then I know it's a trigger. So that golf game, I felt it right away. It happens in an instant. It rises to my chest, to my forehead, and then instant, boom. It's like the dynamite just blew up. So the things I could learn about my triggers are that there are unhealed wounds. Where did that come from? Where did that wound come from? And how can I heal it? How can I process that wound? For example, some of my triggers, as I mentioned, like the girlfriend doesn't respond to a text, or she's not laughing at my jokes, or at the end of a fun vacation. So, you know, each of these have a deeper meaning to it. So my girlfriend not responding to my texts, what does that suggest to me? It suggests that I believe that I'm not worthy enough, or I'm not lovable enough. She's not laughing at my jokes. It suggests to me that I'm not funny enough. I'm not good enough again. At the end of a fun vacation, I get triggered sometimes because it's coming to an end. So I feel a little bit depressed or melancholy. So what does that say about myself? It says that I'm not deserving of good things. I'm a bad person. So the key, again, this takes a lot of work and a lot of time, is to identify and learn when a trigger is happening and apply tools to self-regulate. Much easier said than done, but with time, and so that leads us into the next tool. This next tool, tool number 4, is by far, in this whole thing, for me, is the most important tool of all. Now, this is something I've learned only in the last maybe year and a half, 2 years. It's called STOP. It's an acronym. Okay, an acronym which the word STOP stands for certain actions. So this is something I didn't invent. This is something prescribed by dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT for short, which is used for people with personality disorders, or people who just struggle in general with their emotions. So for example, if something's happening so quickly, because I'm reacting so fast with triggers, that it's likely due to childhood wounds and the chaos growing up at home, well, I need to regulate. I need to regulate and bring that emotion from way up here down to a place where I can manage my emotions real quickly. And this tool has helped me a lot. Okay, so I'm going to share with you this tool. The STOP method is used to manage my emotional dysregulation. The S stands for stop. Stop and freeze whatever I'm doing or thinking. So don't do this while you're driving, obviously. If you're at home or at work, or talking to your partner or getting into an argument, you can stop and freeze whatever you're doing. If you're feeling all of a sudden an onset of a trigger. Okay. This is the most important step, is to stop. Okay. And I really can't underscore this enough and emphasize this enough, that it's not easy to just stop when you're getting triggered. So one of the things I've learned to get better at stopping is actually to practice the stop when I'm actually not triggered. So, for example, if I'm in a calm state, I'm going to practice just stopping what I'm doing, literally just stopping. Okay, so stop, and I'll look around. I could hear the sound of my computer right now. I could hear the sound of my fridge in the background. I could see the white walls, and I could see like the plants in my home. So stopping is really critical to learn when you're in a calm state. Think of it this way: like if you're going to be doing a presentation like this one, you're not going to just go right into it at game time or at showtime. You're going to practice it. You're going to practice it when it's in a calmer state, in a calmer environment. Okay, so stop is the first step. T stands for take a deep breath. One of the most important things is to take a deep breath with a 4-second inhalation and a 4-second exhalation. Okay, and the reason for this, the longer exhalation, is that the long exhalation, the exhalation in your body and your breathing, helps regulate the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the part in your nervous system that actually calms you down. Okay. So when we're triggered, we're heightened. We're in a fight or flight scenario. So we want to stop, take a deep breath, and then pay attention to that breath, and then inhale for 4, exhale for 8 seconds. And then we want to activate that parasympathetic nervous system so that our heart rate can slow down, our brain can slow down, and then we could start moving on to the next step. Okay, so once you've taken your deep breath, once you're kind of in that state where you're paying attention to your breathing, this is where mindfulness comes in, then you're going to start observing your thoughts, which is the O. Look at it from the third person perspective, or from bird's eye view, and look at yourself from a bird's eye view. What am I thinking right now? Like I'm thinking about my girlfriend not texting me, or I'm thinking about, the work issue that I'm having, or the stress about my finances. Observe how you're feeling. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling nervous. Before this presentation, I was feeling anxious. I was feeling nervous as well. Observe your surroundings. Again, mindfulness. I see, again, the white walls. I see the clock on my wall. I see the faces of some of you on this presentation. Okay, but you're not taking action. You notice that these three steps, other than taking deep breaths, you're not doing anything in response to your trigger. And then the first P in stop is put things into perspective. Okay, again, this is where cognitive behavior therapy and cognitive reframing comes in. Is this only a perception? Is my reaction appropriate? Is my inner child wounded? We'll talk a little bit about the inner child. Okay, you're going to ask yourself these questions. Like, are my actions or my behaviors right now appropriate to what's happening? Should I have responded to that at the golf course? Right? And then the final P is proceed with a newer and healthier way that is aligned with your values. We're all good people. We're all loving people. I believe that. I believe our humankind believes that we are kind and generous people. Okay. So instead of proceeding with our old patterns or old habits, we change that neural pathway. We change that by applying a new behavior, new action. Like in CBT, we change that thought, feeling, and behavior. Now we're changing that behavior. So instead of saying to my girlfriend, oh, you didn't watch me putt that golf ball in? How about saying, oh, you missed a good one? Okay. So I can't emphasize this enough. The stop method, it works, but you have to practice this. You could practice the S and the T and the O, I guess, anytime. I used to do this a lot, like 2-3 times a day. I like building jigsaw puzzles at home, so I might be playing the jigsaw, building it, and then I'll just practice. I'll just stop. And then I'll take deep breaths, and then I'll observe my thoughts. It only takes like a few moments to do that. And then practice it, practice it, practice it. And eventually, stopping becomes easier and more automatic when you get triggered. Okay. So if there's one thing I am allowed to prescribe to you, I would say try this one if you're ever feeling that you get triggered a lot. Okay. Moving on. Attachment wounds. Some of you might know about attachment wounds, and attachment wounds is what psychologists call a rupture in the bonding process between a child and a primary caregiver. Its effects can last well into adulthood. So attachment wounds are basically wounds that we don't really know about as children, and even as a parent, we may not necessarily be aware that we're passing down some of these wounds onto our kids. So for example, a divorce in the family might leave a child feeling like they're not important enough, or that they're not cared for enough. When a mother goes through postpartum challenges, she may have a hard time connecting with her baby, with her infant. As a result, the child feels cognitively lost and doesn't know how to self-regulate, because the child looks towards the mom for self-regulation, for affirmations, and that little smile on her face, right? If we experience as children physical neglect, for example, again, we might feel like we're not important enough and we're not getting bonded. The whole thing with attachment wounds, feeling this bond that we have with our caregivers, and that bond is necessary in terms of how safe and secure we feel about ourselves. Okay, obviously, childhood abuse, domestic violence, emotional unavailability leaves us feeling a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. So again, our brains aren't able to self-soothe. So attachment wounds typically happen at a younger age, kind of in the infant age to maybe about I think about 5 or 6 is what the research says. I can't remember exactly. There is a book out there, is a pretty basic book called Attached by Dr. Amir Levine. If you want to learn more about it, or Psych Central is where I take this information from. There's basically, and I'm giving you the very condensed version of this today, there's basically 4 types of attachment styles that we all have. And we kind of ebb and flow between our attachment styles of who we are as individuals. And I've categorized them into the 4 quadrants: avoidant attachment styles, anxious attachment styles. There's the anxious avoidant style, which is kind of a hybrid between the avoidant and the anxious. And then there's the secure attachment style. I'm going to preface this by saying there's no good or bad attachment style. Okay, we typically have a predominant one, but we do switch sometimes between attachment styles, and our behaviors are reflective of our attachment styles. But there's nothing wrong with being an avoidant attachment style or an anxious avoidant. Okay, it's just how our environment kind of forged us into how we respond to our partners sometimes, is what attachment styles are. So for example, for myself, I'm the anxious attachment style, but I certainly can ebb and flow to an avoidant or secure style. Okay, so I'm going to describe to you in more detail the 3, the avoidant, the anxious, and the secure attachment styles, because this is really important in terms of how we want to bond with our kids as well, and how we see ourselves in relationships. So anxious and insecure attachment style. Okay, that's me. Okay, the anxious one. So we're anxious and insecure, jealous. These are kind of some of the traits, but it's not all encompassing. Okay, I just want to again emphasize that these are some of the symptoms that you'll see if you are an anxious attachment person. So fear of abandonment, again, that's me, right? It's because I grew up in a home where I didn't have that emotional security from my parents. Remember, I said to you that we didn't have love as a language of affirmations, right? We had the food, we had the shelter, we had the clothing. We didn't have any emotional connection. So I always felt like home was not really safe, right? It was something I craved. I seek intimacy in my relationships. I didn't have that connection, that bond with my mother. Right? We never really bonded from a loving sense that's typical of what mothers and children would experience. so often seek validation and dependence on others for self-worth, right? So I look to my partner to give me that self-worth, to look at me when I putted that awesome putt on that 9th hole, and to give me those words of affirmation that, you know, that I'm the best golfer in the world. Not true, but anyway, that's really what my subconscious is saying, because I fail to see my own self-worth and importance. Okay. And then the avoidant attachment, avoidant attachment styles are usually developed with families that grew up maybe in a divorce, or family with a lot of family violence as well, or what's the word I'm looking for? Where the parents are always arguing and fighting. So domestic violence is one where the child feels like it's their fault. The child feels like they're helpless. Okay, they're helpless in an environment, in a scenario where they that's beyond their control. So they have to learn at a young age to self-soothe. So they're afraid of intimacy as an adult, or they become emotional unavailable because they're afraid to show their emotions in fear that the pattern is going to repeat itself, where someone's going to leave them, okay, or that the relationship will ultimately end. So they're afraid to talk about their feelings because they keep problems to themselves, because that's how they coped when they grew up. Okay, all their hurt, their fears with their parents, and the divorce, and the angry fights they had to look after their own needs. In relationships, they might stonewall or ghost, where they're too afraid to get too close to someone. Similar to the anxious attachment style, they fail to see their own self-worth and importance. Okay. And the secure attachment style is, in a family that grew up where they're loving words and encouragement, there was a lot of support network. It gives the child a strong sense of self-esteem. So the secure attachment person in a relationship usually has a healthy dose of self-worth and esteem. They're able to manage emotions in a more balanced structure without dependence on others to soothe. So they're able to self-regulate. And they're able to rationalize in relationships and live in the gray area. So that's a really important thing, is that, oftentimes the avoidant, the anxious might kind of live in this area of the black and white thinking, okay, the polarized thinking. The secure attachment style is able to live in this area where, if we can't do it this way, sure, we could do it the other way. Good example is that, my girlfriend came over one time. We were going to watch a play, but she was running late and the traffic was horrendous coming in from the North Shore. And I was upset, but for her, because she's a secure attachment style, she can rationalize and say, that's okay. Like if we missed the play, we missed the play. I just want to spend time with you, right? So they're able to pivot and adapt a lot more. Whereas for me, it's black and white. Nope, you were late for the play. You didn't love me. You didn't prioritize me, right? That's me. Okay, so I know I'm talking a little bit faster. I noticed that, but I have 15 minutes left and there's still a little bit more to go. So our goal, if we are in the anxious style or the avoidant style or anxious avoidant, we want to move towards a more secure attachment style. And one of the tools that I've learned and continue to work with my counselor and even at home is developing a coherent narrative. You might be wondering, what is a coherent narrative? There's a video on it. We'll skip the video, but basically some quotes from some very important psychologists that I follow. Dr. Rick Hanson, he's an author as well. He says, a coherent narrative is a key step into developing a secure attachment style, is to develop a realistic, integrated, coherent account of what happened when you were young and how that affected you. Dr. Dan Siegel coins it as saying, creating a cohesive life story, but making sense of our life experiences that affected us. So let me give you some examples, some very, very simplistic examples of this tool of forming a coherent narrative. So with a disorganized narrative, with an incoherent narrative or disorganized narrative, I might tell you a story about my dad, and this is a very simple story of saying, well, dad didn't play with me. He beat me and he was a mechanic. So it doesn't make sense, right? Or dad didn't love me. He hardly ever cooked for us and he yelled at other kids too. Again, very disorganized, incoherent. So if I'm talking or retelling my story to a counselor, or if I'm journaling about my dad, I might give this kind of factual statements, but all jumbled up. There was no flow with how I'm telling my story. So I'm stuck in that. So that's why part of the reason why I'm still in this anxious attachment style is that my thoughts are still kind of jumbled. But over time, if we could process the stories about our dad and our mom, we could form a more coherent narrative about our past, and we can move our emotions to a much more secure attachment style. So it's making sense of our lives, okay? Which is part of the reason why I shared with you at the very beginning of this presentation about my dad and mom. I wanted to talk about that because I wanted to, it was kind of a double bonus. I wanted to share with you about the history of my dad and mom. I also wanted to see if I could form a coherent narrative for myself too, and continue to practice that. So an example of a coherent narrative might be, although I don't remember spending much time with Dad, I remember our family vacation to Disneyland in Seattle when Dad drove the green station wagon. Much more detail, much more balanced. Dad had a difficult childhood and didn't have a father who raised him. As a result, he likely struggled to understand how to express his love. He likely did the best he could to love me. Again, coherent and much more balanced. An example of my mom. Mom didn't care about me. She always cared about other kids first, and she was mean to me when I had difficulty going to school. Yeah, you know, like probably true, but not exactly coherent. Mom never made time for me. She preferred to work than spend time with me. She once told me I'm the worst kid. Again, those things happen, but it wasn't all encompassing. So mom cared for me as best she knew how to. She was only capable of offering what she received as a child. So there's context to a coherent narrative as well. Mom was a workaholic. She filled her time with chores and errands, giving her a sense of purpose. That's what she learned as a child. Again, that's coherence. Okay. So this one is it is a process, and much like everything else, it is a lengthy process, but it is a very helpful tool in reshaping how our attachment styles can be, and also storing our self-esteem. Okay, so we're kind of in the final little bit. I'm going to blaze through these helpful tools and resources that I've used and learned over the years. Inner child work. A lot of you probably have heard of the inner child. The inner child is really describing us as an adult. We have this core inside of us that is still a young child, okay? And the young child has needs and wants that are met or unmet, okay? Oftentimes, our inner child is hurt, and those are the inner childs like myself who have unmet needs and needs that need to be processed and worked through. So if I'm feeling hurt, again, using the golf course example, well, my partner, she didn't see me putt, so I felt unworthy. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel good enough. So what that all means is that it's actually not me as the adult who's hurting. It's the young little Jason who's probably 6 or 7 years old who's still hurting because his mom didn't watch him, you know, at the school play, or his mom didn't think that his grades were important enough. And I haven't processed that yet. I was not able to process that. So we need to work on our healing our inner child. And one of the tools is to release that inner child. So for example, like, what does your inner child need? These are questions we got to ask ourselves. My inner child needs to be seen and heard sometimes because he didn't get that growing up. How can I embody our inner child, right? What does our inner child need? Maybe I need a hug. I could ask my partner to give me a hug. I could hug myself. I could hug myself right now, right? I could self-soothe and gently just pat my arm, right? What are things I can say to my inner child to make him feel safe? I talk to myself sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with it. I'll tell myself and my young inner child, say, hey, little Jason, how's it going? Or little Jason might respond and say, I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling alone today. I'm feeling lonely. And then I talk it through with myself. or I could journal about it. So what are some things you can do to embrace your inner child? So this is the next tool, the next thing. So we can become our inner child again, our authentic self, if we give ourselves permission to do it. When I was a kid, I won't read all of this, but I love doing all this stuff. As an adult, I love doing all this. Like, I have fun. So be that kid again, embrace that inner child, and do the things that make you feel good about yourself. Smile, laugh, have fun, get creative, get your brain thinking, right? Another tool, I've written so many journals. I don't know, I've got like boxes and boxes filled with journals. Journaling, really simple tool to help restore self-esteem and self-worth. It's about releasing our thoughts. So I ruminate a lot, so I write a lot. No structure necessary, no experience necessary. Just need a pen and paper. You can do it on the computer, although I feel it's more helpful with pen and paper. There's research that
Jason,
yeah.
is there any way you can go back to just so I can take a picture of the screen again?
Yeah.
I got my camera on, just back one more.
Back one more? Yeah. This one here?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a picture of that.
Yeah, for sure.
I went to take a picture and it clicked off. So
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah,
I really
you're very
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. Journaling, research shows that journaling for 15 minutes a day, 3 times a week, can improve mental well-being. I do it a lot. I do it at home. I do it at my girlfriend's house. Listen to soft music while journaling. It's fun. There's no filters, no judgment. There's apps and books out there. You know, go to Chapters. There's lots of books out there to prompt you for journaling if you're needing inspiration. Some questions for reflection when you're journaling. Like, you could write about home life growing up, right? You could write about your experience going to school, whether or not you feel included, you know, past and present. You could describe your relationships. I won't go through all of these. You could even try to, you know, navigate your way through what kind of attachment style are you and why that might be. Okay. Getting to know myself more. This one is a big one for me, really important. Accepting my past and present family relationships. I can't be in denial that my family life is more ruptured than a stereotypical family. I need to acknowledge that. I need to work extra hard on my actions and beliefs and awareness versus those who have had healthier role models, right? I recognize that I didn't have healthy role models. So I do have to work extra hard. I have to embrace my alone time and not place meaning to time apart from my partner, okay? Like, I love being alone too. And I should own that. And I should really enjoy it. And not say, well, being alone means that my partner's going to leave me. No. I'm an introvert. Whether or not you're an extrovert or introvert, embrace it. Right? I feel sometimes I live in this bubble where I'm afraid of being an introvert, that I want to portray myself as an extrovert. Then I feel very uncomfortable doing that. Allowing the freedom to be myself again, just being that inner child again, doing all those fun activities that you like. List out your fun activities, by the way, right? There's nothing wrong with it. Like, I like watching old Transformers cartoons sometimes on YouTube, right? Just write it out. Who cares? And it's your list, and do the things that make you happy. Finding purpose in all this. So I believe in universal healing and self-empowerment. So my journey to this date is for a reason. It's obviously the opportunity to speak to you all. It's an opportunity to hopefully to reach out and touch someone's lives in a positive way. And in that process is to heal myself, and hopefully in the process of healing myself that I might heal my connection again with my son, right? So that's what I believe in. So I find purpose in doing the work. And then I'm going to close off with a really great video. It's 3 minutes long, so we might go a little over time. I hope that's okay.
And that's okay. And I wanted to know if you wanted to take a couple of questions too, but go ahead.
Yeah, let's do this. So it's a 3-minute video with Dr. Rick Hanson. He's one of my favorite authors, so I really want to finish. This is a good note. Okay.
See if you can bring to mind some positive experience, maybe based on what's happening around you, something beautiful or reassuring in your environment, maybe another person. You could bring to mind a memory, a happy time in your life, or just think about some things that you're grateful for. And then, when the challenge starts, see if you can stay with that experience for 10 seconds in a row. It's okay if your mind wanders a little bit, that's pretty natural, but on the whole, can you dwell in, can you become absorbed in this beneficial experience? And in the process of that, actually draw it increasingly into yourself. So, if you can, bring to mind something that's genuine and authentic and positive. It's probably a little thing, it doesn't need to be $1 million moment. And then when I say go, we'll count it down for 10 seconds and see if you can stay with it over the course of this practice. So, bringing to mind whatever it is that's positive that you want to rest in, getting centered in it, having this experience, and now for 10 seconds, see if you can rest in it, even absorbing it into yourself, starting now. Good. Now notice how you feel compared to where you were when we started. If you were able to stay with it, it has probably and understandably and naturally affected you a little bit, probably for the better. While you were resting in this, billions of neurons inside your head were firing together. And in the famous saying, when neurons fire together, they start wiring together. And in the process of resting your mind in this beneficial experience, you are beginning the process of creating a lasting change of neural structure and function.
Stop it right there. So that was a really, really great exercise of where we give ourselves permission to feel good. And that takes practice, right? For those of us who experience trauma, we weren't allowed to feel good. We weren't allowed to feel good about ourselves. So we have to self-induce this feeling of good, as what Dr. Rick Hanson says. We can do it. And in his book, Resilient, he talks about this acronym HEAL, that where we force ourselves to have an experience it and absorb it, just like in this video. So we practice that over time. Again, it could change the neural pathways. So in closing, everyone, we all have a story. And when we realize we're not alone with whatever struggles we have, we can empower and motivate ourselves to heal. Okay? It's what makes us human and relatable. Being vulnerable creates a place of safety and trust, as I feel like I've felt very, very safe with you all here today. So in your own time, ask yourself, what's your story? And change is possible. It's a process that takes time, I'm not going to lie. I think unfortunately, there's a lot of helpful YouTube videos out there, but there's a lot out there that will kind of suggest that you could change your life or get rid of depression or anxiety in an instant. That's, sorry to say, that's a little bit of rubbish, but change is possible and it's a process. Okay. When you cut our hands or our leg, that wound doesn't heal instantly because we say it will. It takes time to heal. So have to put in the work and the commitment and the practice to make that change possible. And when it happens, it creates a new narrative for our stories, or for our history, for our memory, new pathways, and then results in new behaviors. Okay. So I want to share with you, and I could share this presentation with you, the books that I highly recommend. This one's called Resilient: How to Grow an Unshakable Core of Calm, Strength, and Happiness by Dr. Rick Hanson. We just watched him. These are the books that I've read that really changed how I think and feel. This one here by Dr. Ariel Schwartz is called A Practical Guide to Complex PTSD, Compassion Strategies to Begin Healing from Childhood Trauma. Excellent, easy to read. This one is especially easy to read. They're all easy to read. This is the first book that I ever got from my counselor. It's called Becoming the Kind Father, A Son's Journey. It's more autobiographical than the other ones. And it's a short one. It's a thin book by Dr. Calvin Sanborn. Very good story about him growing up with a very abusive and angry dad. This one was also one of my earlier books that I read. It Wasn't Your Fault: Freeing Yourself from the Shame of Childhood Abuse and the Power of Self-Compassion. Dr. or Beverly Engel, she has a couple of books and she's really good. And included this last one here. Some of you might have heard John Bradshaw, Healing the Shame That Binds You. He's kind of like he talks a lot about the inner child as well. So all very helpful books. And that puts my presentation at a close. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. That was really good.
Can you take, if somebody has a question? You can, if Marcy, if you can stop the recording from.